Hello and welcome to this video technical report and demonstration on disaster recovery with Dell EqualLogic PS Series SANs and VMware vSphere Site Recovery Manager 5. This is part 2 where we're going to cover the installation and configuration of the storage replication adapter from Dell EqualLogic. The storage replication adapter from Dell EqualLogic is a plugin that enables Site Recovery Manager to communicate between Virtual Center and the storage array. So all of the things that Site Recovery Manager does, such as creating a clone or promoting the mirror or doing failback or any of those things, it needs to be able to communicate with the SAN. So the first thing we're going to do is actually install the SRA or the storage replication adapter on both SRM servers. This can be downloaded from either the EqualLogic support site or from the VMware SRM SRA site. We're going to launch the setup, and then we're going to click on Next. We're going to agree to the license agreement and click on Next. It's going to ask where do you want to put it. We're going to keep the defaults and say Install. It's a very small application and installs very quickly, and then we're going to go ahead and say Finish. Now we also have to do this on the other site as well, because both sites are going to be able to need to communicate with the SAN. Once we've installed the SRA on both sides, the next thing we actually have to do is configure the storage adapters and configure the pairing of Site Recovery Manager. So Site Recovery Manager is actually a Virtual Center plugin, and you can actually install it if this is the first time by clicking on Plugins, Manage Plugins, and then you'll actually see the Site Recovery Manager plugin right here. So you would download it, install it on every client that it needs to communicate with it, and then what's going to happen is it's going to show up under your Home folder right here next to all of your other plugins. So if we click on Site Recovery, and then we're going to log into the other site, I'm briefly going to take a look real quick over all of the different tabs and kind of talk a little bit about them before going to the actual storage replication. So in this environment, the Site Recovery Manager pairing has already been configured. So just like you have to configure the pairing or the relationship partners between your PS Series SANs, between the protected site and the recovery site, you also have to do the same thing with Site Recovery Manager. So Site Recovery Manager requires an individual Virtual Center running in the protected side, as well as a different Virtual Center server running on the recovery side. You pair those up and it communicates between the two. That way when you create a recovery plan or protection group, which we'll discuss later, it'll actually be able to communicate to the partner side and tell it what's going on. The other thing that you can do is actually configure your resource mappings, and what your resource mappings really do is make sure that all of your clusters and resource pools and all of that stuff match up on the other side. So if you have some virtual machines in resource pool 1 in production, you may want to have them in the same resource pool on the DR site, or maybe a different resource pool. So you match all of that stuff up ahead of time. So the resource mappings, and we'll talk about a couple of others, but they're all global settings. Once you configure the global settings, what they'll do is they'll inherit that as they're being protected. But you can still go in and modify individual virtual machine properties. So like if I click on resource mappings, or over here I have folder mappings, so I can actually create folders. So just like I have virtual machine folders in the protected site, if I want to create virtual machine folders in the recovery site, I can actually match them and pair them up. The other thing I can do is do my network mappings, and then the last thing I want to do is create and configure my placeholder data stores. So now placeholder data store is basically a temporary location to store the virtual machine placeholder files. And what this means is when Site Recovery Manager is actually failing over or doing a test or bringing these virtual machines online, those virtual machines have already been configured temporarily on that other site. What happens though is they're not pointing to their actual data store, they're just sitting there in a temporary state. So Site Recovery Manager will actually re-register those virtual machines to point to the correct data store. But it needs a place to be able to store them temporarily while you're holding them. This also allows you to see which virtual machines are protected on the other side, as well as making sure that the virtual machines can be brought online when you fail over, regardless of what happens on the protected site, even if it's inaccessible. Once I've configured all of that, the next thing I'm going to do is actually configure my array managers. So I'm going to click on the Array Managers tab, and then I'm going to select, I have to do this on both sides. Now the cool thing with Site Recovery Manager 5 is I can actually do both the production site protection and configuration and the DR site protection and configuration all from one Virtual Center interface. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the prod site, and then I'm going to click on the SRAs tab. Now you'll notice that it sees the PS Series SRA. If I didn't see this here, I'd go ahead and just rescan real quick. And if I still don't see the SRA there, I would want to double check that the SRA installed properly on my Site Recovery Manager server. In previous versions of Site Recovery Manager, sometimes you had to restart the SRM server or service, but here you can actually just rescan for it. Now, if it doesn't see the partnership SRA, it'll actually alert you and make sure that you can see it on both sides as well. Now that we've got that, I'm going to click on the Getting Started tab and then click on Add an Array Manager. So the display name, we're going to go ahead and give it Prod SAN. The SRA type is the Dell EqualLogic PS Series SRA. If this doesn't show up here, that's when you would go back to the SRA tab and then try to rescan and find it. You may also have multiple SRAs, and they just click on the drop down to find the one that you are using for EqualLogic. We're going to click on Next. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to give the local group connection parameters as well as the partner group. So because I'm on the prod side or production side or the protected side, we're going to go ahead and give it all the information for the local SAN. So we're going to enter in the IP address, the username, and a password. And now we're going to give it the partner group. Username and password, and then we're going to click on Next. It's going to go through and say adding an array manager. As long as you don't get any error messages, it's going to say it was a success, and we're going to say finish. And now it's going to show up right here. This is the prod SAN. Now I'm not done yet because I still have to configure the array manager for the other side. So I'm going to click on the DR site. And remember, I can do this from either the actual Virtual Center client for the other side, or I can do it all from within one Virtual Center GUI. Click on Add an Array Manager and do the same thing. But now this one is going to be going in the opposite direction. So DR SAN, we're going to click on Next. We're going to give it the local group connection to the DR site, which is this one. Username and password, and then its partner. Username and password. And click on Next. It's going to go out and add that. It was successful, and we'll say finish. So we're still not done yet. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to click on the production SAN, and then we're going to go to array pairs. You can see right here it says no array pairs are enabled. If there's no array pairs enabled, it's not going to be able to figure out which data stores are part of a replication partnership to know which volumes and VMs are going to be protected. So we're going to click on array pairs. Now you can see all of the different partners that are configured for it. What we have to do is actually tell Virtual Center Site Recovery Manager which one of these partnerships is being used for SRM. So for us, it's this guy right here. We're going to click on Enable. You can see it's in progress. And once it's figured out all of the replicated devices, it'll say enabled. If there's any errors right here, you can double check it and see what's going on. You need to be able to make sure that, of course, the SRAs can communicate and you do have replication configured. Next thing we're going to do is click on the devices. And the Devices tab will actually show us which of the volumes correlate with data stores that can be protected and be used for Site Recovery Manager. Now, anytime I add additional volumes that are created for replication, I can go back in here and click on Refresh. And you can see the data stores that each of the different volumes correspond with, as well as the volume name on the SAN. Once I've configured my array managers, I've created the array pairs and double-checked my devices. Once I can see everything here, I'm ready to move forward with Site Recovery Manager configuration.